I'm alive. The one in that coffin isn't me. Be careful with our children. I received this message on the day of my husband's funeral. What happened next changed my life forever. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching my story from, so I can see just how far it has reached. My name is Margaret Maggie Whitaker, I'm 70 years old, and what I'm about to tell you turned the quiet, careful life I built into splinters. The funeral of my husband, Ernie to everyone who mattered, was the stillest day I can remember. 44 years of marriage reduced to flowers that smelled like sugared soap and a polished walnut box that didn't look big enough to hold a life. The wind moved the oaks in Cedar Ridge Cemetery, and I stood there in my one black dress, knees soft, palms damp, trying to breathe without thinking of the empty side of our bed. That's when my phone vibrated inside the little leather purse Ernie bought me at a county fair 20 years ago. An unknown number. A message that froze my blood. I'm alive. That's not me in there. Don't trust Charlie or Hank. I looked up so fast the world smeared. On the far side of the casket stood our sons. Charles, whom we'd always called Charlie, and Henry, still Hank even in his 40s. Shoulders squared, suits too sharp for a small-town burial. Grief should make a person soft around the eyes, undone at the edges. But their faces looked arranged. Composed. Hank wiped a tear that left no shine on his cheek. Charlie kept checking his watch, as if he had another meeting penciled between graveside prayers. It's cruel, I thought. Someone hacked a number or picked a widow at random for a prank. My thumbs trembled anyway. Who is this? Where are you? The reply landed before I could blink. Can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. I slipped the phone back into my purse like I'd touched fire. My best friend Dolores, Lori to me, shifted closer, her hand settling on my elbow. Steady, Mags, she whispered, mistaking shock for grief. I nodded without words. Across the hole in the world, Charlie caught my gaze and offered the kind of smile you give a client. Hank lifted a steadying palm. Their suits were charcoal. Their shoes were clean. I could smell Lori's lavender lotion and the damp soil. I could hear the minister, a kind man with a thin voice, saying Ernie's name the way doctors say diagnoses. None of it felt real. I met Ernie on a clear Tuesday in 1979, on Maple Street in a town that thought itself bigger than it was. I was carrying a basket of peaches from Grayson's Market, calculating which bills I could postpone and still keep the lights on for my mother, whose heart had given up the idea of regularity. Ernie stepped out of Whitaker machine and repair with grease under his nails and a way of smiling that made my shoulders drop. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, then, flustered, Maggie, isn't it? He insisted on carrying my peaches even though I told him I had 2 good arms. That was Ernie, 2 parts capable, 1 part gallant, and not a drop of show-off in him. We married in the church with the cracked bell and moved into a 2-bedroom house with a roof that shivered in March winds. I took in hems and baked pies for the Rotary's fundraisers. He could make anything run, lawn mowers, sump pumps, dreams. Charlie arrived with his father's eyes, Hank with my stubborn mouth. Sundays we'd fish at Miller's Pond and eat bologna sandwiches that tasted better by the water. The boys learned to ride bikes in our cracked driveway, knobby knees flashing, voices loud enough to chase crows. Ambition showed up first in Charlie, like a suit 2 sizes too big he couldn't wait to grow into. Why don't we have a new truck? He asked at 12. Why don't we move to Columbus? By the time he was 18, Ernie had offered him a job at the shop. Charlie shrugged, that careful shrug that says I've already decided. I'm not spending my life fixing other people's problems, he said. Hank followed his brother from the start. Less polished, more eager, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. They left for Chicago to do real estate, a phrase that rolled off their tongues like a magic spell, and returned to Cedar Ridge wearing jackets that cost more than my refrigerator. The first time Charlie brought his girlfriend, Jasmine Fields, to our door, her heels sank into our front lawn. She made a sound the way you might if a bird flew too close, and she smiled with teeth that told me how expensive they were. So cute, she said, looking around, as if our living room were a dollhouse someone had set up to teach thrift. At dinner she moved the green beans around with her fork and whispered to Charlie that next time we should go out, somewhere with options. Hank stayed single and adopted a vocabulary built from podcasts and boardrooms. You too should consider a retirement community, he said one Thanksgiving, tapping data on his phone. There are amenities, activities, safety. Ernie squeezed my hand under the table. Later, on the porch where we watched summer roll in over soy fields, he said, money's a tricky teacher. Teaches you to look down without telling you you're doing it. When the boys started pushing hard, it felt at first like concern wrapped in impatience. A licensed realtor stopped by uninvited to assess your equity. A mortgage broker left a card. Charlie came home one weekend with a manila folder. Dad, Mom, he said, laying out glossy brochures like a magician's deck, your house appraises at maybe 12 grand. I can get you into a place in Lincoln Oaks, heated pool, on-site clinic, all the bells and whistles. I'll cover the difference. Our whistles are fine, Ernie replied, not unkindly. And I like knowing which creak in this floorboard means winter's early. They didn't back off. Hank brought articles about falls and hip fractures. Jasmine asked pointedly what our plan was, as if love and a stubborn garden and a shop that smelled like metal and oil were poor excuses for a life. Then came the Tuesday that split everything. Ernie left at 6 with a thermos and a kiss that lasted an extra beat. I started his lunch, meatloaf the way he liked it, when the phone rang. Mrs. Whitaker? A steady voice asked. This is Cedar Ridge Memorial. Your husband's been brought in. There was an accident at the shop. Words blurred. Lori drove because my hands shook. We skidded into the ER and there were our sons already, suits perfect, expressions managed. We came as soon as we heard, Charlie said, and for a second an old maternal reflex, pride at their competence, flickered and died. In ICU, tubes turned Ernie into someone the nurses had to remember was loved. The doctor said blast injuries and cranial trauma, said the word coma, like it was a hallway we had to pass through. I took his hand, still rough, still Ernie, and told him about the sandwiches I'd packed, about the cat that refused to come inside, about the sound the old fridge made at 3 a.m. His fingers twitched against mine. Sometimes there are involuntary spasms, a nurse explained gently, and patted my shoulder for being gullible. The boys asked practical questions. Hank wanted billing codes. Charlie wanted the exact wording of our health insurance. In a quiet room with a coffee maker that burned everything it brewed, Charlie said, Dad has a $50,000 life insurance policy, Mom. There's also a workplace accident policy, $5 grand. We'll handle the paperwork. I don't care about money, I said, too loud. I care about your father breathing. He nodded with that patient expression men use on women they think are hysterical. 3 sunrise-colored days later, while the monitors beat out other people's heartbeats, mine collapsed. At 4:37 a.m., Ernie was declared. The doctor said, I'm sorry, with eyes that didn't hide. The nurse tucked a sheet as if smoothing it would ease us. Charlie and Hank arrived ironed and ready, phone numbers for funeral homes already saved. They chose the cheapest casket. It's what Dad would have wanted, simple, Charlie said. I wanted to believe him and couldn't. At the burial, the crowd was thin. No men from the shop, none of the old farmers whose belts Ernie had saved with midnight welds. We kept it intimate, Charlie told me, as if intimacy were a gift. I watched dirt strike wood and felt something in me tilt. Then the text. Then the 2 more. Can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. That night our house sounded like itself. The tick of the clock Ernie repaired twice, the radiator settling, the porch swing creaking 1 soft inch in the wind. I pulled the battered tin box from Ernie's desk, birth certificates, vehicle titles, receipts, the life of a couple documented in ink. There it was, his life insurance policy, updated 6 months ago. The old amount had been $5,000, the new figure screamed at me. An increase to $50,000. A second policy, new, accidental death, workplace, signed 8 weeks back. I ran my finger over his signature. It looked like his, but tremulous in a way that made me lean closer. On the bank statements from Cedar Ridge Credit Union, 3 withdrawals I didn't remember, $3,000 in January, 4 in February, 4 in March. The note line said shop repairs. Ernie told me everything, except apparently this. My phone vibrated again on the kitchen table. Check your accounts, the unknown number wrote. Look at who moved the money. I stared at the screen until the letters steadied. Whoever this was, they knew more than a prankster could guess. They knew where to prod. They knew which boards creaked. In the morning, I decided I would go to the bank. I would ask for copies. I would stop being the version of myself my sons expected, quiet, compliant, grateful, and become the woman Ernie married, the one who could carry peaches and bad news and still keep walking. By 9 the next morning, I was standing under the brass clock at Cedar Ridge Credit Union, the one Ernie used to set his watch by. My palms left damp ovals on the polished counter. A young teller offered condolences that sounded practiced, then went to fetch the branch manager. Elaine Hart had run that place since before Charlie's first scrimmage. She came out from her glass office with a tissue tucked in her sleeve and the kind of hug you don't offer clients, only neighbors. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," she said. "Ernie was a good man. What can I do?" "I need to see copies of any withdrawals from our accounts for the last 6 months," I said. "And who authorized them?" She didn't blink. "Of course." In a minute she was laying out statements on a little table in her office, tapping lines with a capped pen. "Here, January, 3,000. February, 4. March, 4. She pulled the paper trail, withdrawal slips in a plastic sleeve, each with a shaky version of Ernie's name. "That's not his hand," I murmured. "Not on a good day." Elaine tilted the page. "He did look tired. He wore his shop jacket in, smelled like oil and coffee. He said he needed cash for a compressor and electrical work." "Was he alone?" She hesitated, the way people do when they're trying to honor a habit of discretion and the memory of a decent man at the same time. "The first time, yes. The second and third, Charlie came with him. He did the talking." She flipped to a note she'd scrawled on a post-it, "Ernest W. plus son. He said he was helping because your husband had forgotten his reading glasses." Ernie forgot plenty, trash day where he set his pencil, but never his glasses, which he wore on a cord like an old sea captain. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead until the room came back into focus. "Do you have video?" I asked. "We do, but I can't release it without a court order. If the police request it, that's different." She reached across, squeezed my wrist. "Maggie, is something wrong?" "Something doesn't add up," I said, which was true and also the smallest version of the truth I could bear to say out loud. I thanked her, tucked the copies into my purse, and stepped into a sunlight that felt a shade off from the one I knew. The text arrived as I crossed the parking lot. "Check the shop. Ernie kept notes in the bottom right drawer. Don't tell the boys you're going." I stopped in the painted crosswalk and looked both ways like a child. "Who are you?" I typed, then erased it. He'd answered me last night. He or she would answer again when they wanted. I drove to Whitaker Machine and repair the way you approach a sleeping dog, slowly, with care, ready to back away. The sheep's metal building looked as it always had, patched roof, bay door up, the smell of hot metal and old projects. If there'd been an explosion big enough to fling a man into a coma, the place hadn't gotten the memo. The pegboard held every wrench and driver where Ernie's habit-ruled hands had left them. The welding rig sat quiet, hoses neatly looped. No scorch marks on the block wall. No cracked glass. I walked the length of the workbench, palm down, expecting grit from shattered things, finding dust and the persistent ghost of oil. "Where did you go, old man?" I asked the room. In Ernie's desk, the bottom right drawer stuck the way it always had. You had to wiggle and lift. I wiggled and lifted, and there it was, the ledger he'd kept since Reagan, ruled paper with neat columns, and underneath, a stack of loose sheets, invoices, receipts, notes written in pencil in the careful print he used when he wanted to make sure I could read it without asking. "Charlie keeps talking insurance. Says it's for Maggie. Don't like it." Next page. "Hank wants me to sign something about modernization. Says he'll explain later. Doesn't." A third. "Jasmine says retirement community. Told her I plan to die in my chair with the game on. She smiled like I made a joke." Under the papers lay a sealed envelope with my name on it, my full name, the one he only used when he wanted me to take him seriously, Margaret. The seal had been pressed with a quarter. You could see the eagle's wings in the wax. My hands shook. I eased it open and slid out a single page. If you're reading this, something went wrong. The boys have been in a hurry about money. I'm not trying to scare you, I might be wrong, but I've felt pushed into decisions that aren't mine. Steven Ramirez is decent. Met him when I fixed his truck. If something happens to me, call him. He knows where to look. There was a number at the bottom in Ernie's block print. The phone in my purse buzzed again like a nudge. 3 p.m. today. Back booth at the Old Mill Cafe. Ask for Steven. Come alone. I stood in the middle of the shop and let myself feel it. The love in the letter, the dread between the lines, the fact that Ernie had seen what I, in my stubborn affection for our sons, refused to see. Then I turned off the lights, closed the bay door, locked the small one, and drove to the cafe with the envelope in my bag and my heart thudding like a badly balanced fan. The Old Mill was between lunch and dinner, quiet except for a couple of contractors nursing bottomless coffee and a server refilling sugar caddies. I asked for the back booth. She pointed with a smile. At 3 on the dot, a man in his 50s slid into the seat opposite. He was tall, his hair going silver at the temples. He carried himself like someone who knows how to enter a room without making it about him. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. His voice was warm and careful. "I'm Steven Ramirez. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. "Ernie said you were decent." He looked down, swallowed once, and set a brown folder on the table. "Your husband came to see me 3 weeks ago. He told me your sons were pressuring him about insurance and selling the house. He asked me to look into their finances, quietly. He was embarrassed to ask. He kept saying, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just tired. I told him tired men don't hire private investigators. Worried men do." He opened the folder. On top sat a small recorder the size of a matchbox. He pressed play. Ernie's voice filled the booth, and I bit the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't cry and miss a word. "Steven, if anything happens to me, it's not going to be because I tripped over a wrench. The boys keep coming by with papers. Charlie says new policy will protect Maggie. Hank asked me what time I leave for the shop and whether I've changed my coffee. Who asks a man about his coffee like that?" Steven clicked and advanced the file. New voices, Charlie's smooth and clipped, then Hank's eager. They were talking on a line Steven had legally tapped after Ernie gave consent to monitor his own phone and shop. "We can't wait much longer," Charlie said. "He's getting jumpy." "It'll look like a stroke," Hank replied. "This stuff reads as heart or brain. The old man's practically a walking diagnosis." I didn't realize I'd grabbed the edge of the table until I felt the laminate dig into my fingers. "What stuff?" I asked. Steven slid out a photo. Charlie at a hardware store 2 towns over, ball cap pulled low, sunglasses too expensive for a man pretending to be invisible. He was carrying a small brown bottle and a bag. A timestamp, 5 days before the accident. "Methanol," Steven said. "Windshield washer concentrate. Ingested, it metabolizes to formaldehyde and formic acid. Symptoms look like a lot of things doctors are trained to see first: stroke, heart attack, diabetic crisis. Unless you're looking for it, you don't. It's tasteless in coffee." A second photo, a receipt. Paid cash. Fake name. The clerk's notary log had the description of a driver's license that didn't line up with anyone named on the receipt. Steven had underlined a height. Charlie's height. I thought of the thermos Ernie kissed me over that last morning. I thought of the way his fingers had tightened around mine in the ICU, as if trying to surface. "There's more," Steven said, and pulled a stapled set of pages from the folder. Public records. Hank's in debt to a sportsbook that doesn't call lawyers. Charlie owes a private lender in Chicago 70 grand. They've been spending like men who expect a windfall. "And the doctor who signed the paperwork at the hospital?" I asked. He looked at me like he meant it when he said, "I'm sorry." "Doctors can be sorry and wrong," Steven said. "Or sorry and pressured." The wording on Ernie's preliminary death report is sloppy. Complications of workplace incident. That ends investigations before they start. It also speeds insurance. I stared at sugar packets lined up like little flags. "Why did you text me from a blocked number?" Because I've seen what happens when suspicions leak before evidence is in one hand and a lawman's pen is in the other, he said simply. And because your sons filed a petition this morning in county court to have you declared incompetent to manage your affairs. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow at 10. If that goes through, they'll control your money and where you live. The room tilted. Stephen reached out and didn't touch me, just put his hand on the table so I could if I needed to. We're not going to let that happen, he said. But we have to move. I need your permission to take all of this, your copies, Ernie's notes, my recordings, to someone who won't look the other way. Sergeant Monroe at the sheriff's office is straight as a string. He'll get a judge to sign orders for the bank footage, the hospital records, the body to be tested properly if needed. Do it, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's, steadier than I felt. I slid Ernie's letter across the table. He trusted you. So do I. Stephen packed the folder and stood. I'll go now, he said. I'll call when I've got Monroe in a room with a recorder running. Not call when. Call today, I said. I have been a wife for 44 years and a mother for 42. I know what a plan looks like, and I know when someone's already set theirs in motion. He nodded once, like a salute. Today. When he left, I sat with my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. Outside, the sky was bright, a lie of a day. I paid, left too much tip, and walked to my car the way you walk into surgery, scared, but more scared of what happens if you don't go through with it. At home, I pulled the curtains on the street side and left the backyard light on. I took Ernie's old Louisville Slugger out of the umbrella stand and leaned it by the door. I wasn't planning on swinging. I just liked the feel of something solid under my palm. At 5:30, Charlie texted. Stopping by at 7 to talk next steps, Mom. Brought you some things you might need. A heart emoji, as if that made it care. I stared at the screen a long minute, then typed back, 7 works. I'll have coffee on. At 6:45 I set 2 mugs on the counter, filled the kettle, and wiped down surfaces that were already clean. Nervous energy does that. It makes you polish what no one will notice. I thought of Ernie's thermos, how the steam must have smelled ordinary that last morning. I pulled down the tin of chamomile tea instead of the coffee canister. If Charlie wanted caffeine, he could pour it himself. 7 o'clock sharp, the knock. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more. Our sons had always made noise arriving, Hank whistling, Charlie jangling keys. Tonight, Charlie tapped like a man accustomed to doors opening for him. I smoothed my skirt, opened up. He stood there alone, sharp suit, hair styled with product that smelled faintly chemical. He carried a white paper bag with handles. Mom, he said warmly, too warmly. I brought supper. Figured you wouldn't have the heart to cook. Behind him, Hank's sedan idled at the curb, lights off, his outline visible in the driver's seat. He's taking a call, Charlie explained without me asking. Business never sleeps. Business, I echoed. Come in. He stepped across the threshold, bag swinging. Inside, takeout boxes from a downtown bistro I couldn't afford. Steak tips, garlic mashed potatoes, a slice of cheesecake sealed in plastic. He set them out with exaggerated cheer. Thought we could eat together, talk about arrangements. I've been thinking a lot about your future, Mom. I poured chamomile into his mug, let him notice the herbal tag dangling. No coffee? He asked. Too late for me, I said. Didn't want the smell to tempt me. He sipped, eyes narrowing a fraction. Tastes different. Relaxing, I said evenly. He leaned back, scanned the kitchen walls like he was calculating square footage. This house has served its purpose. Memories, sure, but it's drafty, and the wiring's outdated. With the insurance payout, you could move somewhere comfortable. A retirement villa in Dayton. Staff on call. Pools. Neighbors your age. I'm comfortable here, I said. Mom. His voice softened like he was humoring a child. This is about safety. And efficiency. You don't have to maintain a yard, shovel snow, climb stairs. Hank and I worry. We want you settled. Settled. Like an estate. Like an account. You boys seem to be in a hurry, I said carefully. Your father's been gone a week, and already you're planning the distribution of his memory. He put his mug down with precision. Dad wouldn't have wanted you to struggle. We're just accelerating what's inevitable. A shadow passed the curtain, Hank's figure moving toward the porch. I stiffened. Before I could decide whether to reach for the bat by the door, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the blocked number, police at 8. Stole them. I slid the phone face down, heart thumping. Accelerating, I repeated, is another word for rushing. And rushing is when mistakes get made. Charlie's gaze sharpened, calculating. What do you mean? Your father never rushed, I said. Not fixing engines, not raising you, not living here. He believed in patience. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Patience is a luxury. We don't have it anymore. Hank knocked once and came in without waiting. He wore a leather jacket over his suit, hair damp as if he'd run a nervous hand through it. Evening, Mom. He kissed my cheek, cold, perfunctory. Smells like chamomile. We sat at the table, the three of us. I pushed food around my plate. They ate quickly, neatly, like men on schedule. Conversation circled the same drain, selling the house, moving me, managing funds. Charlie outlined investment strategies. Hank mentioned a friend with opportunities in Chicago. At one point Hank said, it'd be easier if you signed power of attorney. That way, we could handle details you shouldn't worry about. I laid my fork down. Your father and I managed for 4 decades without anyone else's hand on the till. I'm not starting now. The room thickened with silence. Charlie cleared his throat, about to press again, when tires crunched outside. Headlights swept across the wall. A knock, firm, official. Charlie's jaw tightened. Who's that? Let's find out, I said, rising before he could stop me. At the door stood Sergeant Monroe in uniform, hat tucked under his arm. Behind him, Stephen Ramirez carried the brown folder. Evening, Mrs. Whitaker, Monroe said. Sorry to intrude. Could we have a word inside? Charlie stepped forward fast. Is there a problem, officer? Monroe's eyes flicked over him, unimpressed. Matter concerning your father's passing. We need to review some documents. I opened the door wider. Come in. Charlie started to protest, but Monroe's badge was already out, the weight of authority filling the room. Stephen set the folder on the table. Hank muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch. We've obtained a court order, Monroe said, pulling papers from his jacket. For access to financial records, hospital reports, and to preserve evidence at Whitaker Machine and Repair. We also have here recordings and photographs provided by a licensed investigator. He looked squarely at my sons. Charles Whitaker, Henry Whitaker, you're not under arrest at this moment. But you are subjects of an investigation. You'll need to remain available for questioning. Charlie's composure cracked just enough, nostrils flaring, lips pressed. Hank's hand twitched on the table, fingers drumming once. Stephen slid photographs into view, Charlie at the hardware store, bottle in hand. A printed transcript of voices, my sons' voices, discussing timing, dosage, cover stories. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to watch them read their own betrayal. This is ridiculous, Charlie snapped. Completely circumstantial. You can't. It's evidence, Monroe interrupted. Combined with financial records and medical anomalies, it paints a troubling picture. Hank shoved back from the table. We don't have to listen to this. You do, Monroe said calmly. And you'll answer when summoned. The boys exchanged a glance, a silent, familiar language that once meant mischief with baseballs and windows, now meant something darker. Monroe packed up, promised updates, and left with Stephen. The house settled back into quiet, but nothing was the same. Charlie gathered the takeout boxes with rigid motions. Mom, don't let them fill your head with nonsense. Dad's gone. You're vulnerable. They're exploiting that. Hank added, voice low and sharp, be careful who you trust. They left without hugging me. I locked the door behind them, slid the bolt, and leaned against the wood until my legs steadied. At midnight, another text, They know we're onto them. Stay vigilant. Don't drink anything they bring. I put the phone down, stared at the ceiling, and whispered into the dark, Ernie, give me strength. The next morning, news spread through Cedar Ridge. The sheriff's office had exhumation orders pending, and subpoenas for the hospital's internal communications. The case wasn't rumor anymore. It was official. I pulled on my coat, tucked Ernie's letter into my pocket, and stepped into a day that smelled like snow. The town felt different. Eyes lingered, whispers trailed, but I walked with my chin up. I was no longer just a widow. I was the keeper of truth, and I intended to see it through. Because if my sons had truly poisoned their father, then they weren't my sons anymore. They were strangers wearing my boys' faces, and strangers could be faced down. That night, I sat at Ernie's old desk, opened the ledger, and wrote a single line at the bottom of his last entry, I will finish this for both of us. Then I turned the page, and began to plan. The first snow of the season came 2 days later, soft as sifted flour over the roofs of Cedar Ridge. I stood at the kitchen window watching flakes settle on the porch rail, thinking of the winters when Ernie would salt the steps before dawn so I wouldn't slip. Now the porch was mine alone, and the silence pressed heavy. At 8 sharp the phone rang, our landline, not the cell. I lifted the receiver. Mrs. Whitaker? Sergeant Monroe here. We've executed the subpoenas. I'd like to update you in person. Of course, I said. He arrived before noon, cap dusted with snow, Stephen beside him carrying a slim briefcase. They sat at my kitchen table, where the ghosts of family dinners still clung. Monroe opened a folder. The hospital's internal emails show your sons contacted Dr. Matthews, Ernie's attending, before your husband even arrived in the ER. They asked for discretion about his pre-existing conditions. The language implies expectation. In plain terms, they set the narrative before the doctors could test. My stomach clenched. And the exhumation? Stephen answered. Judge signed off this morning. Forensic toxicology will test for methanol. That's our linchpin. I gripped my teacup so hard it rattled. How long? A week, maybe 2, Monroe said. But with the recordings and financial evidence, it's strong already. I breathed out slowly. And in the meantime? Stay careful, Stephen said. They filed another petition in probate court yesterday. They want emergency guardianship, citing erratic behavior. It'll be heard in 3 days. Erratic. My voice cracked. I buried my husband and started asking questions. That's not erratic, it's human. They'll twist grief into instability, Stephen said gently. We'll contest it, but they might try to provoke you into outbursts. Don't give them ammunition. I nodded, the advice bitter on my tongue. That evening I sorted through Ernie's belongings in the shop, searching for strength in his order. Each wrench in place, each bolt jar labeled. Beneath a rag in the bottom drawer, I found something new, a small cassette recorder, dusty but functional. Inside, a tape. I pressed play. Ernie's voice, quiet, almost embarrassed. Maggie, if you ever find this, I wasn't imagining things. The boys are desperate. I heard Charlie on the phone about debt. Hank mutters about odds, parleys, bookies. They're not themselves. I love them still, but I don't trust them. Please, be cautious. I pressed pause, tears clouding my eyes. Even in fear, he thought of me first. The next morning, Cedar Ridge buzzed like a kicked beehive. At Grayson's Market, whispers followed me down the aisle. Investigation, someone hissed. Insurance money. Another voice pitying, poor Maggie, losing husband and now her sons. I bought only bread and milk, left quickly. Outside, Hank leaned against his sedan. Morning, Mom, he said lightly. Heard you've been meeting with the sheriff. That true? I steadied my bag. They have questions. I answer. You don't need to answer anything without counsel, he said, smile thin. Charlie's got a lawyer in Columbus. He can handle it. I don't need handling, I replied. His smile faded. Careful. People might think you're being difficult. I walked past him without another word, my pulse hammering. That afternoon, Stephen called. I've arranged for you to meet a victim's advocate tomorrow. She'll sit with you at the guardianship hearing. Thank you, I said, relief loosening my chest. The hearing was held in a paneled courtroom that smelled of varnish and old paper. Charlie and Hank sat with their lawyer, slick hair and sharp suit, while I had Stephen and a woman named Carol, calm and steady. Charlie testified first, voice dripping with concern. Our mother has been erratic since Dad's accident. She claims to receive mysterious texts, accuses us of wrongdoing, refuses sound financial advice. We fear for her well-being. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, hands clasped. I am grieving, yes. But grief is not incompetence. My husband kept notes of his suspicions. I have seen financial records of withdrawals I didn't authorize. The sheriff has evidence. My sons want guardianship not to protect me, but to control what's left of Ernie's life. Gasps rippled. The judge rapped his gavel for quiet. This matter will remain open pending the criminal investigation. Petition for guardianship denied at this time. Charlie's jaw tightened. Hank muttered a curse. I sat down, trembling but victorious. Outside the courthouse, snow swirled. Stephen touched my shoulder. You did well. You stayed calm. I felt anything but calm, I admitted. That's courage, he said simply. Days blurred into each other, each marked by waiting. Waiting for test results, for court dates, for the next knock. I avoided answering the door unless I saw Monroe's cruiser or Stephen's sedan. Friends came by with casseroles, eyes full of questions they didn't dare ask. One night, just past midnight, a rock clattered against the porch. I flicked on the light. No one. But on the step lay an envelope. Inside, a photograph of Ernie in the hospital bed, tubes everywhere. Across it in marker, let it go. I sank onto the steps, shaking. My phone buzzed. Stephen's number. Don't panic, he said before I could speak. We expected intimidation. Save the envelope, don't touch more than you have. Monroe will pick it up. Expected. I whispered. They're cornered animals. Cornered animals lash out. The next day Monroe collected the photo, bagged it for prints. We'll trace where it was printed, he said. But my gut says one of your sons, or someone they paid. 2 mornings later, he called again. Toxicology came back. Methanol confirmed in tissue samples. Lethal levels. I dropped into Ernie's chair, the one that creaked. My hand over my mouth, I whispered, I knew it. We're preparing charges, Monroe said. It won't be long. But long enough for danger to build. That evening, as I locked up, headlights flared in the drive. Hank's sedan, engine running. He rolled down the window. Mom, he called, voice urgent. We need to talk. Alone. I have nothing to say, I answered through the storm door. He leaned closer, face shadowed. Don't testify. Don't. For your sake. You don't know who else is involved. Is that a threat? I demanded. It's advice, he said, then sped off, tires spitting snow. I bolted the door, heart pounding, and reached for my phone. Another blocked message waited. They're desperate. Stay strong. Tomorrow, everything changes. I stared into the dark, clutching Ernie's letter. Tomorrow. And I knew, deep in my bones, the storm was just beginning. The morning broke gray, the kind of Ohio sky that feels heavy enough to crush the roofs beneath it. I had hardly slept. Every creak of the house made me jolt awake, expecting Hank's sedan or Charlie's knock. When the doorbell rang at 8:15, my chest locked. It was Monroe, flanked by 2 deputies. Their boots tracked snow onto the mat. Mrs. Whitaker, Monroe said, his voice firm but almost kind, the county prosecutor authorized arrest warrants this morning. We're taking your sons into custody. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Relief and dread collided in my chest. Where? I managed. Charlie at his office in Columbus. Hank at his condo. We've got teams moving simultaneously. Safer that way. And me. You're not safe here alone, he said plainly. They might have friends. I want you somewhere secure until arraignment. Stephen stepped from behind the deputies, coat collar high against the cold. "I'll drive you to a safe location. Bring essentials. Nothing more." I gathered Ernie's letter, the ledger, my purse, and a framed photograph of us by the pond the summer before the boys left for Chicago. When I locked the door, I knew it might be the last time I saw the house untouched. Stephen drove us to a small motel off Route 40, the kind with numbers painted crooked on the doors. "Not glamorous," he said, "but anonymous. I've already arranged for a room under another name." Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floral bedspread, hands shaking. Stephen placed the briefcase on the desk and said, "They'll be arraigned tomorrow. But tonight, they'll be angry. If anyone contacts you, don't respond. Go through me." I nodded, though my throat burned with the effort of silence. By late afternoon, the news broke. Local businessmen arrested in father's death. The Cedar Ridge Gazette blared online. Photographs of Charlie in handcuffs, head down. Hank glaring at cameras as deputies guided him into a cruiser. The anchor's voice cool and practiced. The Whitaker brothers face charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and attempted fraud. My phone buzzed non-stop. Neighbors, distant cousins, church ladies. I silenced it. At 7, Stephen knocked gently. "Dinner?" he asked, holding 2 paper bags. "Burgers and fries. Not much but hot." We ate sitting on the bed, salt stinging our fingers. For a moment it felt almost normal, like the late nights Ernie and I spent laughing over fast food after a long shift. Then Stephen's phone buzzed. He read the message, jaw tightening. They made bail. My fries went cold in my lap. Bail? Already? High-profile lawyer from Columbus. Judge set it steep, but Jasmine covered Charlie's portion. Hank's came from a wire transfer, unknown source. "So they're free," I whispered. "Temporarily," he said. "Trial's coming. But it means you must be careful. They know the net's closing, and desperate men make reckless choices." That night I left the lamp on, Ernie's photo by the bed, his letter folded under my pillow like a prayer. The next morning, Monroe called. "We'll need your testimony at the preliminary hearing. Your husband's notes, the recordings, everything will be introduced. It won't be easy, Mrs. Whitaker." "I'll do it," I said, though my hands were trembling. "For Ernie." In court, the room buzzed with reporters, pens scratching like insects. I sat in the witness box, palms damp. The prosecutor asked me to describe the texts, the discoveries in the shop, Ernie's suspicions. I held up the letter. My voice cracked, but I read it. "If you're reading this, something went wrong. The boys have been in a hurry about money. I love them still, but I don't trust them." Across the room, Charlie's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing to slits. Hank smirked like it was all theater. The defense attorney objected, called it hearsay. The judge overruled. Then came Stephen with the recordings. The courtroom hushed as Charlie's voice played, "No, we can't wait longer. The old man's starting to suspect. I've got the methanol." I closed my eyes, tears sliding. When I opened them, jurors were staring hard at my sons. After the session, Stephen guided me out a side door. "You were strong," he said. "I felt like I was breaking," I admitted. "Sometimes breaking is how the light gets in." That evening at the motel, I tried to read, but my eyes blurred. Around midnight, a shadow crossed the thin curtain. My pulse thundered. I crept to the window, saw nothing but empty parking lot. Still, I called Stephen. He arrived 10 minutes later, hand on his concealed holster. "Probably nothing," he said, though his eyes scanned every corner. "But we won't take chances. Pack your things." We moved again, this time to a farmhouse outside town owned by a retired deputy. Safer, more isolated. Still, every rustle of wind sounded like threat. The following days dragged. The boys were confined to the county, reporting daily to authorities, but their lawyer spoke to press constantly, misunderstandings. Overzealous investigation. Family tragedy twisted into crime. Meanwhile, I sat in the farmhouse with my grief. At night, I'd touch Ernie's photo and whisper, "I'll see it through. For both of us." On the fourth day, Monroe came with news. Trial date set. 3 months from now. 3 months, I repeated. 3 months of them free? Bound by bail terms, he reminded. Monitored. But yes, free. Stephen added softly, that means we must hold steady. Evidence is on our side, but they'll try everything to undermine you. That evening, I walked outside into the snow-sparkled field, stars overhead. My breath hung white in the air. I thought of Ernie beside me, his hand warm around mine. They killed you, I whispered to the night. But they won't win. The wind stirred, almost like an answer. I went back inside, sat at the farmhouse table, and began writing in Ernie's ledger. Not his neat columns, but my own words. Day 1, they're out on bail. I'm afraid. But I'm still here. Day 2, testified. Broke and stood strong at once. Day 3, shadows at the window. Stephen came. Still safe. I wrote each day because if they took everything else, they wouldn't take my truth. And I vowed that when the trial came, no matter how much it broke me, I would stand in that courtroom and look my sons in the eyes, and speak for Ernie. Because the dead cannot speak. But the living can roar. The farmhouse became my world. Days passed measured by the rhythm of small routines. Tea in the morning, walks to the edge of the field, letters written in Ernie's ledger before bed. The isolation was safety, but it was also a mirror. Every quiet moment reflected my grief back at me. Stephen visited almost daily. Sometimes with updates from Monroe, sometimes just with groceries and his steady presence. They'll push hard in discovery, he warned one afternoon, spreading papers on the farmhouse table. Their lawyer wants to suppress the recordings. Claims the wiretaps were illegal. But Ernie gave permission, I said. It was his phone, his shop. Exactly. The law's on our side. Still, they'll drag it out. Expect appeals, delays. I rubbed my temples. 3 months feels like a lifetime. Stephen leaned forward. Then don't think of months. Think of days. One at a time. That's how we get through. That night alone, I whispered into Ernie's photo, one day at a time, love. I'll try. 2 weeks later, Monroe arrived with guarded eyes. New development. We traced the money used for Hank's bail. Offshore account tied to a Chicago bookmaker. He's deep in gambling debt, Maggie. Very deep. I felt no surprise, only a grim confirmation. So that's why, I said softly. That's why my sons turned into strangers. Debt makes men dangerous, Monroe replied. But it also gives us motive. He left me copies of documents, wire transfers, bank logs. Paper that proved what my heart already knew. My sons had gambled away their integrity long before they gambled with their father's life. In Cedar Ridge, the town's gossip became unavoidable. Even at the farmhouse, news reached me. Church friends called, people are saying the boys were framed. Or, some say you're confused, Maggie. Grief plays tricks. Each word stung, but I forced myself to answer calmly. I'm not confused, I told them. I know what I found. I know what my husband wrote. The truth will stand. Still, at night I replayed those words, doubting myself. If the town could be swayed, could a jury? Stephen must have seen the storm in my eyes, because one evening he brought a stack of case files and dropped them in front of me. This isn't just your word against theirs, he said firmly. Look, photos, receipts, recordings, toxicology. It's a mountain of evidence. Don't let whispers tear that down. I touched the stack, the weight of it grounding me. Thank you, I murmured. The preliminary motions hearing arrived. I sat behind the prosecutor, Stephen at my side. Charlie and Hank entered in pressed suits, Jasmine trailing with a glare sharp as glass. The courtroom murmured. Their lawyer argued passionately, entrapment. Circumstantial evidence. A grieving widow's unreliable memory. When it was our turn, the prosecutor played a clip, Hank's voice, clear as a bell. Tomorrow Charlie slips it into Dad's coffee. By the time they realize, it'll look like a stroke. The room froze. Even the defense lawyer blanched. The judge leaned forward. Motion to suppress denied. Evidence stands. Relief washed over me so strong my knees went weak. Stephen steadied me with a hand under my elbow. As we left, Charlie's eyes bored into mine. Cold, furious. Hank smirked, lips shaping words only I could read. This isn't over. I held his gaze. It is, I thought. You just don't see it yet. Back at the farmhouse that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside set me on edge. At 2 a.m., a sharp thud jolted me upright. I grabbed the bat from beside the door, heart hammering. Stephen, on guard duty in the living room, was already at the window. Just a branch, he said, lowering the blinds. But his shoulders stayed tense, and he sat awake the rest of the night. By morning, exhaustion dragged me down. Stephen handed me coffee. You need rest. I'll stay here until the trial if I have to. You have a life, I protested weakly. Right now, this is my life, he replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes held something deeper, commitment beyond duty. I looked away before my grief mistook kindness for something more. Still, his presence was a balm. The weeks crawled. More hearings, more motions. Each time, the evidence held. Each time, my sons looked smaller, angrier. But Jasmine grew bolder, cornering me outside court once. You're destroying them, she hissed, nails digging into her clutch purse. Do you know what you're doing? I met her eyes. I'm telling the truth. They're your children, she spat. They stopped being my children the day they murdered their father, I said quietly. Her face twisted, but she said nothing more. One snowy morning, Monroe arrived at the farmhouse with news that chilled me deeper than the wind. We intercepted chatter. Your sons talked about making you look unstable again. Planting evidence, pills, maybe alcohol bottles. Trying to convince the court you're unfit. They'd go that far? I whispered. They already killed once, Monroe said bluntly. Stay alert. We'll increase patrols. That night I walked the farmhouse halls, double-checking locks. I wrote in Ernie's ledger, they want to erase me like they erased you. But I'm still here. I won't disappear. As trial drew near, reporters swarmed. Satellite vans parked by the courthouse. Headlines screamed betrayal, sons accused of poisoning father for insurance. Through it all, Stephen shielded me, Monroe steadied me, and Ernie's letter reminded me why I endured. One evening, sitting by the farmhouse fire, Stephen said, You know, Maggie, you've been stronger than anyone had a right to ask. Ernie would be proud. Tears stung my eyes. I hope so. I just want justice. You'll have it, he promised. I turned the letter over in my hands, the paper worn soft from touch. When I testify, I said, I'll tell them everything. About the texts, the notes, the recordings. About the way my sons looked at their father not as a man, but as a number. I'll make them hear him again through me. Stephen nodded. That's exactly what you'll do. And in that quiet farmhouse, with snow drifting outside and shadows playing on the wall, I felt, for the first time since Ernie's funeral, not just grief but resolve. The trial was coming. The reckoning was near. And I was ready to face my sons, not as their mother, but as the voice of the man they silenced. The trial began on a Monday morning in early spring, the courthouse square crowded with reporters and townsfolk who came to see the spectacle. I arrived through the side entrance, escorted by Monroe and Stephen, my heart thudding like a hammer against my ribs. The marble halls echoed with voices, footsteps, anticipation. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and perfume from too many strangers crammed into pews. The judge presided with a solemn face. The jury sat stiff, notebooks ready. On the defense side sat my sons, Charlie in a navy suit, jaw tight, Hank in gray, smirk curling the edge of his mouth. Jasmine perched behind them, her eyes sharp daggers. The prosecutor's opening statement painted a picture of greed, desperation, and betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about two sons who valued money over blood, who poisoned the very man who gave them life. The defense countered with polished words. Tragedy can twist perception. Grief clouds judgment. The prosecution's case rests on assumptions and questionable recordings. These boys loved their father. This is nothing more than a witch hunt. I sat silent, fingers gripping Ernie's letter inside my purse like a talisman. The prosecution began with foundation, bank statements showing withdrawals, insurance documents updated under pressure, receipts from the hardware store. Then came the toxicologist, testifying that methanol was present in Ernie's tissues at fatal levels. The courtroom gasped when he explained, in plain words, it was not an accident. It was poison. Next came the recordings. The jury leaned forward as Charlie's voice filled the room. No, we can't wait any longer. The old man's starting to suspect. I've got the methanol. Hank's reply followed, tomorrow in his coffee. They'll think it's a stroke. I closed my eyes, tears sliding silently. When I opened them, jurors were staring hard at my sons, their expressions shifting from doubt to horror. The defense objected, argued about context, claimed voices could be doctored. But Stephen's careful investigation held timestamps, voice analysis, corroborating evidence. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself. Then it was my turn. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat at the witness stand under the weight of every gaze in the room. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I am Margaret Whittaker. I was married to Ernest for 44 years. He was a good man. He worked with his hands, provided for his family, loved his sons. And he died because those sons betrayed him. The prosecutor guided me gently. I described the texts that came during the funeral, the discoveries in the shop, the notes Ernie left. I read his letter aloud, my voice breaking only once. I love them still, but I don't trust them. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, a shark circling. Mrs. Whittaker, isn't it true you were under immense emotional strain? That grief might have caused confusion. Grief does not forge documents, I replied. Grief does not create recordings of my sons planning murder. He pressed harder. You claim to have received mysterious texts. Couldn't those have been pranks? Fabrications? I looked directly at my sons. Pranks don't line up with bank records, with receipts, with poison in a man's body. My husband knew. I know. And now you know. The courtroom was silent, the defense attorney retreating with a frown. Days turned into weeks as witnesses testified. Former colleagues of Ernie spoke of his health, his habits. Bank clerks confirmed Charlie's presence during suspicious withdrawals. A hardware store clerk identified him as the man who bought the methanol. The defense scrambled. They painted Hank as a misguided gambler, Charlie as a pressured businessman. They hinted that perhaps Ernie had grown forgetful, careless, that maybe he'd poisoned himself by accident. But the jury's faces told me the story wasn't landing. Outside the courthouse, Cedar Ridge divided into camps. Some still whispered sympathy for my sons. They couldn't have, not those boys we watched grow up. Others avoided me entirely, shame in their eyes. But many offered quiet support, a hand on my arm, a casserole left at the farmhouse, prayers murmured in church pews. Through it all, Stephen remained constant. Every day he sat near me, calm and steady, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. Sometimes at night, after long days of testimony, he'd drive me back to the farmhouse, the silence between us companionable. Once, as we pulled into the gravel drive, he said softly, "You carry yourself with more strength than anyone I've ever met." I swallowed hard, looking away. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel it, he said. You just have to keep standing. And you do. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor spoke with fire. This case is not about money. It is not about property. It is about betrayal, the deepest betrayal imaginable. Ernest Whittaker deserved better than to be poisoned by the very sons he raised. His wife deserves justice. You, the jury, have the power to give it. The defense clung to doubt. There is no video, no eyewitness. Just circumstantial evidence and the grief-clouded testimony of a widow desperate to make sense of tragedy. Don't let sympathy replace proof. Then the jury left. Hours passed like years. I sat with Stephen and Monroe, my stomach knotted, my hands cold. Every creak of the courthouse echoed. Finally, the bailiff called us back. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the foreman speak. On the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Whitaker, we find the defendants, Charles Whitaker and Henry Whitaker, guilty. The words cracked through the room like thunder. My breath came out in a sob I couldn't hold. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margaret Whitaker, we find the defendants, guilty. Hank slumped, face pale. Charlie stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Jasmine gasped, covering her mouth. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Sentencing will proceed immediately. The prosecutor requested the maximum. The defense begged mercy, citing youth wasted, potential lost. The judge's voice was stern, unyielding. Charles and Henry Whitaker, you murdered your father in cold blood and conspired to murder your mother. For these crimes, this court sentences you both to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. The gavel struck again. It was over. As deputies led my sons away in shackles, I felt a hollowness inside me, like an organ had been cut out. I did not cheer, did not smile. Justice had been served, but it was bitter. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, questions flew. Mrs. Whitaker, how do you feel? I answered quietly, I feel like a wife who lost her husband, and a mother who lost her sons. Justice doesn't bring him back, but it gives him peace. Stephen guided me through the crowd, shielding me with his body. When we reached the car, I collapsed into the seat, tears streaming. He placed a hand over mine. It's done. You kept your promise to Ernie. I clutched the letter in my purse. Yes. But at what cost? He didn't answer, because there was no answer. As we drove away, the courthouse shrinking in the rearview mirror, I looked out at the fields rolling green with spring and thought, justice is heavy, but silence is heavier. And I had chosen the weight I could bear. The trial was over, but silence didn't mean peace. The farmhouse felt cavernous now, every room echoing with memories and loss. I rose before dawn, brewed tea, and sat by the window watching fog curl over the fields. For the first time in months, no subpoenas, no hearings, no court dates loomed. Yet I felt restless, hollow, like a soldier home from battle with no orders left. Stephen visited often, sometimes with Monroe, sometimes alone. One morning he arrived carrying a cardboard box. From the courthouse archives, he explained. Copies of everything, transcripts, exhibits, recordings. Official record of what happened. I stared at the box. Why would I want reminders? He shrugged. Because memory fades. Paper doesn't. And because someday, someone will ask for the truth. Best you keep it. I carried the box to Ernie's desk, set it beside his ledger, and closed the drawer. Some truths I wasn't ready to reread. Cedar Ridge treated me differently now. Some crossed the street to avoid me. Others offered condolences like apologies. At church, whispers trailed behind my pew. That's her. The mother whose sons went to prison. I lifted my chin, sang hymns in a steady voice, and tried not to hear. One afternoon Dolores, my old friend Lori, brought a casserole, her eyes shining with pity. Maggie, the town doesn't know how to handle this. Folks grew up with Charlie and Hank. It's hard for them to accept. I raised them, I said flatly. It's harder for me. She gripped my hand. Don't let gossip define you. You did the right thing. But righteousness felt like ash when I walked past the old Little League diamond, remembered Ernie cheering as Charlie hit a triple, Hank chasing foul balls. Ghosts were everywhere, and they wore my boys' faces. 2 months later, sentencing paperwork arrived confirming transport to a federal penitentiary. I stared at the envelope long before opening it. Inmate, Charles Whitaker, Henry Whitaker. Sentence, life. Life. A word that meant forever, but also gone. That night, I dreamed of Ernie. He stood by the pond in his work shirt, waving. I tried to run to him, but mud pulled at my feet, heavier with every step. When I woke, tears soaked my pillow. I decided to visit his grave. I hadn't been back since the funeral, too raw, too afraid of the texts, too haunted by doubt. Now, with truth confirmed, I felt ready. The cemetery was quiet, grass green from spring rains. I carried a bouquet of wildflowers, Ernie's favorite. Kneeling, I traced his name on the stone. "It's done," I whispered. "They'll never hurt anyone again." Wind stirred the branches above, and for a moment, I swore I felt his presence, steady and warm, the way it always had been beside me. Back at the farmhouse, I began sorting through Ernie's things in earnest. His overalls, still smelling faintly of oil and soap. His tool chest, every socket arranged just so. The act of tidying gave me purpose. In one drawer, I found another note in his handwriting. "If anything happens, tell Maggie she was always my anchor." I pressed the slip to my chest, sobbing. "You were mine too." Weeks stretched into a routine. Gardening, writing in the ledger, visits from Laurie. Yet something lingered, a shadow of unfinished business. One evening, Stephen noticed it. "You're restless," he said. I sighed. "Justice is done, but my life feels empty. I don't know who I am without them. Not just Ernie, but even the boys. Loving them, worrying about them, it was my life." "You're still you," Stephen said gently. "A survivor. And survivors build again." "Build what?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Something that honors Ernie. Something that turns this pain into purpose." The idea took root slowly. At first, I resisted. But the more I thought, the clearer it became. Families like mine, betrayed from within, often suffered in silence. If I could use the insurance money, Ernie's last gift, to help others, maybe I could breathe easier. I met with a lawyer in town. "I want to start a foundation," I told him, "for victims of family crimes. Counseling, legal aid, safe housing if needed." He adjusted his glasses. "That's ambitious. But doable. Do you have a name in mind?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. The Ernest Whitaker Foundation. The months that followed were full of paperwork, meetings, and plans. It kept my hands busy, my heart focused. Donations came, small at first, then larger as word spread. Reporters wrote follow-up stories. Widow turns tragedy into advocacy. The first woman we helped was young, her brother having stolen her inheritance. She wept in my arms, whispering, "No one believed me until now." I told her, "I believe you. And you're not alone." Each case brought back my own wounds, but healing too. Every person helped felt like a small victory against the darkness that had nearly consumed me. Not everything was easy. Letters arrived from prison. "Charlie stiff, Hank's bitter. You betrayed us," they wrote. "We were desperate, but still your sons." I read them once, then locked them in the drawer with the transcripts. I had no answer that could change what they'd done. Jasmine moved away, leaving behind whispers and unpaid bills. Cedar Ridge slowly shifted, whispers softening into respect, people recognizing me not as the mother of criminals but as a woman who had stood against them. On the first anniversary of Ernie's death, I organized a memorial fundraiser. The church hall filled with flowers and photographs of him smiling, fishing, fixing engines. Neighbors told stories of how he'd repaired their tractors for free, given advice, lent tools. I stood at the podium, hands steady. Ernie was a man who believed in hard work and honesty. He gave more than he had, and asked for little in return. His life was stolen, but his legacy will live in every person this foundation helps. Applause rose, warm and sincere. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. That night, back at the farmhouse, I sat on the porch with Stephen. The stars were clear, the air cool. "You've built something good," he said. I nodded, gazing at the sky. "I think Ernie would be proud." "He would," Stephen agreed. "And you should be proud too." I looked at him, really looked, at the silver in his hair, the kindness etched into his face. For months, he had stood by me, protector and friend. I felt gratitude, deep and steady. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" "For not letting me break." He smiled softly. "You never broke, Maggie. You bent, but you didn't break." I leaned back, listening to the crickets, feeling Ernie's absence like a scar, but also his presence in the work I'd begun. The trial had ended, but my story hadn't. A new chapter was opening. one written not in betrayal, but in resilience. And as I closed my eyes, I knew, grief would always walk beside me, but so would strength. And from strength, something good could grow. The second year after the trial began like the first. Quiet mornings, tea by the window, the farm fields rolling green. But something inside me had shifted. Grief was still there, yes, but it no longer drowned me. It walked beside me like a companion I had learned to live with. What filled the empty space was work, real, demanding work. The Ernest Whitaker Foundation had grown faster than I dared imagine. At first, it was just me, Stephen, and Carol, the victim's advocate who'd sat with me during the guardianship hearing. We rented a small office above the old pharmacy in town. By the second year, we had volunteers, a hotline, and a lawyer who worked cases pro bono. Families came from other towns, sometimes other states, carrying stories of betrayal and abuse. We listened, we guided, we gave them what Ernie never had, someone to believe them before it was too late. But with growth came strain. Every story reopened wounds. A woman whose daughter forged her checks. A man whose brother tried to poison him for inheritance. Each case was like a mirror showing me pieces of my own nightmare. At night, I'd write in Ernie's ledger, not the facts anymore but prayers. Lord, give me strength to carry this pain without letting it hollow me out. Life in Cedar Ridge shifted too. People no longer crossed the street when they saw me. They stopped me in the market, offered thanks, sometimes donations slipped into my purse. Yet there were still whispers. Old friends of Charlie and Hank muttered that prison was too harsh, that boys make mistakes. I didn't argue anymore. Truth didn't need my defense. Laurie remained steadfast. She came over Sundays with pies, her chatter filling the farmhouse. One evening, as we shelled peas on the porch, she said gently, "Maggie, you've given so much to others. But what about you? What about your happiness?" I looked out at the fields, the sunset painting everything gold. "Happiness feels like a luxury," I said softly. "It isn't," she replied. "It's survival. Don't you see? You survived the worst. Now you deserve the best of what's left." Her words lingered. Stephen was part of that conversation in my head more than I admitted. He had become my anchor, appearing with quiet consistency, driving me to meetings, fixing leaky faucets, sharing dinners when the loneliness pressed too hard. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with something unspoken, and I'd look away guilty. Could I hold both grief and new affection in the same heart? One night, after a long board meeting, he drove me back to the farmhouse. We sat in the car with the engine ticking cool. He cleared his throat. "Maggie, I've been thinking. I don't want to overstep, but would you like to come to dinner with me sometime? Not as your investigator, as your friend." My pulse jumped. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Finally I said, "Stephen, I'm 70 years old. I buried my husband. My sons." My voice cracked. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm asking, not pushing. Just think about it." I nodded, tears stinging. That night I wrote in the ledger, "Is it betrayal to feel a spark of life again? Or is it what Ernie would want, for me to keep living?" Meanwhile, news from prison arrived in the form of letters. Charlie wrote sparingly, words measured, almost polite. "Mother, conditions are harsh. I think of Dad often. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll remember I was not always this man." Hank's letters were angrier. "You ruined us. We were desperate, but you chose strangers over your own blood." I read each once, then locked them away. Forgiveness was beyond me, though I prayed for the strength to at least stop hating. The foundation held its first annual fundraiser gala in Columbus. I wore a simple navy dress, Ernie's wedding band on a chain around my neck. Standing at the podium before hundreds of donors, I told my story, not with tears this time, but with purpose. I was once a woman who doubted her own sanity, who believed her grief was confusion. But evidence proved otherwise. And what saved me was not only truth, but people who believed me when I said something was wrong. This foundation exists to be that belief for others. For every family betrayed, for every victim silenced, we say, "You are not alone." The applause thundered. Donations poured in. That night, lying in the hotel room, I felt Ernie near. "We're doing it, love. Your name is saving lives." Back in Cedar Ridge, life found small joys. Gardening returned to me, dirt under my nails, tomatoes ripening in the sun. Church potlucks, laughter with Laurie, quiet evenings with a book. Healing wasn't linear, some nights grief clawed me raw. But more often, peace held me. One afternoon, I visited the prison. It wasn't obligation, it was closure. Sitting across the glass, Charlie looked older, lines carved deep. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I know what I did can't be undone. But I need you to know, I regret it. Every day. I thought money would fix everything. I see now it destroyed everything." I studied him, searching for sincerity. Maybe it was there. Maybe it wasn't. Finally, I said, "Regret is not the same as repentance. But I hope one day you find the latter." He nodded, eyes wet. I left without seeing Hank. I wasn't ready for his bitterness. The second anniversary of Ernie's death came with a service at the cemetery. I stood before his stone, foundation members around me, Stephen at my side. "Ernie taught me honesty, hard work, love," I said. "They took him from me, but they could not take what he planted in my soul. This foundation, this work, it's my way of keeping him alive." We released lanterns into the twilight, their glow rising like prayers. My heart ached, but it was a softer ache, touched with hope. That night on the porch, Stephen spoke again. "Maggie, you've built something incredible. But you've also carried it all alone. Let me share some of that weight. Not just as a colleague. As someone who cares about you." I looked at him, the stars reflected in his eyes. For the first time, I didn't look away. "Maybe," I whispered, "it's time I let myself live again." He smiled, not triumphant, but tender. "Then we'll take it one day at a time." As the crickets sang, I thought of Ernie, how he'd want me to keep moving, keep loving, keep building. My story wasn't over. It had changed shape, yes, scarred and jagged, but still moving forward. And as I leaned back in my chair, stars wheeling above, I felt the weight of both past and future. Grief and hope, loss and new beginnings, all coexisting in the fragile, stubborn heart that still beat inside me. I had lost my husband. I had lost my sons. But I had found my voice. And I would use it until the very last day. By the third year after the trial, Cedar Ridge no longer looked at me only as the widow whose sons went to prison. They saw me as the woman who had built something from ashes. The Ernest Whitaker Foundation had expanded into a proper center downtown. Bright offices with volunteers answering calls at all hours, a counseling wing, and even a small emergency shelter. Every time I unlocked the door in the morning, I whispered, "This is for you, Ernie." But with growth came new challenges. Money, always money. Grants to apply for, budgets to balance. Some nights I stayed up past midnight with ledgers spread across the kitchen table, reminding me of Ernie's careful columns. Stephen often dropped by with coffee, sometimes rolling up his sleeves to help crunch numbers. "You've turned into quite the executive," he teased once. "I never wanted to be," I said. "But maybe I needed to be." He smiled. "And maybe Ernie knew you could be." One spring afternoon, I visited the prison again. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed closure. This time it was Hank who asked to see me. I almost refused. His letters had been nothing but venom, but something in me wanted to face him, to strip away whatever power his anger still held. He looked rougher than Charlie, hair grayer, eyes harder. He leaned into the phone behind the glass. "So, the great Maggie Whitaker, savior of the broken, destroyer of her own blood." I met his glare calmly. "I didn't destroy you, Hank. You destroyed yourself. And Dad." He sneered. "We were drowning. Debt pressure, you don't know what it's like." "I know what it's like to work myself ragged to feed you," I shot back. "To watch your father bleed his hands dry fixing cars so you could have shoes, school, a chance. You call that drowning? We gave you everything we had." For a moment, his bravado cracked. His eyes darted away. Then he muttered, "Maybe I don't regret Dad. But I regret you." I felt no anger, only pity. Then rot in that regret, Hank. It's all you have left. I stood and walked out, lighter than I'd felt in years. That summer, the foundation received national attention. A reporter from New York wrote a feature, From Betrayal to Beacon, The Widow Who Built Hope. Calls poured in. Donations doubled. With them came requests for me to speak at conferences, to share my story beyond Ohio. The thought terrified me: airplanes, hotel stages, strangers staring. But Stephen insisted. You've already faced down a courtroom full of people. You can face a crowd who actually wants to hear you. So I went. In Chicago, I stood before hundreds, lights glaring, microphone trembling in my hand. I told the story, not with shame, but with conviction. I spoke of Ernie, of the texts at the funeral, of the trial, of the aftermath. When I finished, the crowd rose to their feet. A woman in the front row sobbed, "That's my story too." I realized then it wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us, the silenced, the betrayed, the survivors. Back in Cedar Ridge, life with Stephen deepened in quiet, steady ways. He never pushed, never demanded. He was simply there, driving me to speaking events, fixing leaky faucets, sitting on the porch sharing iced tea. One evening he said, "Maggie, I'm not trying to replace what you had. I couldn't. But I'd like to be part of what you have left, if you'll let me." I thought of Ernie, his smile, his letter, his warning. And I thought of how he always wanted me safe, loved, cared for. Slowly, I nodded. One day at a time. Stephen smiled. "That's all I ask." The 4th anniversary of Ernie's death arrived with an unexpected honor. The governor himself presented me with a medal for community service. Standing on the stage, medal heavy around my neck, I whispered under my breath, "For you, Ernie." Later that night, back at the farmhouse, I walked through the shop where his tools still hung. Dust lay thick, but the order remained. I touched his hammer, his workbench, and felt him near. "We're doing good, love," I whispered. "We're making sure no one else is silenced like you were." But healing is never a straight line. Some nights grief ambushed me, sharp as the day I got that first text at the funeral. I'd wake sweating, heart racing, hearing Hank's smirk, Charlie's cold voice. I'd sit on the porch until dawn, listening to crickets, whispering prayers. Stephen never pried. Sometimes he simply sat beside me in silence, his presence enough. One fall, Laurie grew ill. Cancer, swift and merciless. I visited her daily, held her hand, read her psalms. One evening, she whispered, "Maggie, you showed me how to live through loss. Now show me how to leave without fear." I kissed her forehead, tears choking me. "You're going to where Ernie is. Tell him I'm still standing." When she passed, I grieved deeply, but with gratitude for her friendship. At her funeral, I promised myself, every friend lost, every pain endured, would only strengthen my resolve to help others. 5 years after the trial, the foundation purchased a larger building. We named the main hall the Ernest Room. On the wall hung a portrait of him, kind eyes, gentle smile. Beneath it, words, truth, love, justice. The ribbon cutting drew crowds from across the state. Survivors spoke, children lit candles, and I gave a short speech. What began as tragedy has become a movement. This building is not a monument to loss, but to resilience. Ernie's life was stolen, but his name now saves others. Applause filled the hall, and I felt peace bloom inside me. Later that evening, alone at home, I reread Ernie's letter for the 1,000th time. His words were faded, but clear. If something happens, don't trust blindly. Protect yourself. Live on. "I'm trying, Ernie," I whispered. "I'm still here. Still fighting. Still loving." I closed the ledger, wrote one final entry for the day, 5 years gone. But love remains. And as long as it does, so will I. I blew out the candle, walked to the porch, and sat under the stars. The air was cool, the night alive with crickets. Beside me, Stephen joined quietly, no words needed. We sat together in the silence, and for the first time in years, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of memory, of purpose, of love that endured even through loss. My story had been born from betrayal. But this chapter, this life I was still writing, was built on resilience. And resilience, I had learned, was another word for hope. 10 years had passed since the morning I buried an empty coffin and received a text that shattered my world. 10 years since Ernie's voice warned me, even from beyond, not to trust the children I had raised. And though time had carved lines deeper into my face, though my body was slower, my spirit was sharper than ever. The Ernest Whitaker Foundation had become more than I'd ever dreamed. What began as one room above the pharmacy now stretched into a statewide network: shelters, counseling centers, a legal aid hotline running day and night. Survivors called us from every corner of Ohio, sometimes beyond, saying the same words I once whispered into my phone: "I'm scared, and no one believes me." And each time we answered, "We believe you." At the 10th anniversary gala, a ballroom full of people stood beneath chandeliers, raising glasses to Ernie's name. A slideshow of photographs played: Ernie at the pond, Ernie fixing a neighbor's tractor, Ernie holding our boys when they were still innocent. My voice cracked as I stood at the podium. Ernie's life was stolen by greed, I said. But his name now saves lives. That is our victory, not revenge, not bitterness, but transformation. To every survivor here tonight, know this: you are not broken. You are proof that love outlives betrayal. The applause thundered. I pressed Ernie's wedding band, still on the chain around my neck, and whispered, "We did it, love." Back in Cedar Ridge, I had become something of a symbol. Strangers waved when I walked to market. Schoolchildren came on field trips to the foundation, learning about resilience. People no longer whispered about the mother of criminals. They spoke instead about the woman who turned grief into hope. Yet at home, the nights were still long. Grief never vanished, it only changed shape. Sometimes I dreamed of Charlie as a boy, bringing me wildflowers, his gap-toothed grin wide. Sometimes I dreamed of Hank, chasing fireflies in the yard, laughing until he hiccuped. In dreams, they were still mine. In waking life, they were still serving life sentences. Their letters came less often now. Charlie's were reflective, remorseful. He wrote of prison gardens, of books he was reading, of a hope that one day he might speak to me face to face again. Hank's letters stopped altogether 5 years in. Silence from him was both relief and sorrow. I never replied. Forgiveness was beyond me, but I prayed for them still. That, at least, I could give. Stephen never left my side. 10 years after stepping into my life as a detective with a briefcase of evidence, he was my partner in every way. We never married. Somehow the word felt too final, too much like replacing what could never be replaced, but we shared our lives. He moved into the farmhouse, fixed its aging beams, planted vegetables beside my flowers. We cooked dinners, argued over crosswords, held each other through sleepless nights. One evening, sitting on the porch as fireflies blinked, he said, "Maggie, we've built something good, haven't we?" "Yes," I whispered, leaning against him. "Out of rubble, we built a home again." He squeezed my hand. Ernie would be proud. Tears stung my eyes. I think so too. Cedar Ridge had changed in those 10 years. The market where Ernie once haggled over bolts of cloth was now a coffee shop. The Little League Diamond was a parking lot. But the town itself had grown gentler with me. On the 10th anniversary of the trial, the mayor unveiled a plaque outside City Hall, in honor of Margaret and Ernest Whitaker, for courage in the face of betrayal and dedication to justice. As I stood there, children holding candles around us, I felt Ernie's hand in mine again, as real as the night he first asked me to dance in that dusty old gym. One afternoon, I visited the prison for what I knew would be the last time. Charlie had requested it. He was grayer now, thinner, but his eyes were clear. "Mother," he said through the glass, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted to thank you. Because your testimony, your strength, it forced me to face myself. And facing myself saved me, in a way. I read, I garden, I teach other inmates. I'll never leave these walls, but inside them, I finally became a man Dad might have respected." I swallowed hard. "Charlie, regret won't give me back what I lost. But I'm glad you found some truth in here. That's more than I ever thought you'd have." He nodded, eyes wet. "Tell Dad I'm sorry, when you see him." I left without looking back. I never visited again. As for Hank, I heard from Monroe that he remained angry, bitter, unchanged. Perhaps that was his choice. Perhaps some hearts cannot be saved. I prayed for him anyway, because that's what a mother does, even when love has been burned to ash. The farmhouse, once haunted, had become a place of peace. The workshop Ernie loved was now a small museum, open to Foundation visitors. His tools, his overalls, photographs of him smiling. A sign on the wall read, "Every life matters. Every truth deserves a voice." Children came on field trips, pressing their hands against the old workbench, listening to me tell Ernie's story. I never described the crime in detail to them, only the lesson: when something feels wrong, trust yourself. Speak up. Someone will believe you. Their eyes shone with understanding. That was enough. On the 10th anniversary of Ernie's death, I held a memorial service by the pond. Friends, neighbors, Foundation families gathered. Lanterns floated across the water, glowing like stars fallen into the earth. I stood before them, hair silver now, voice steady. Ernie lived a simple life, but his legacy is extraordinary. Not because of money, not because of power, but because love endures. They tried to bury him in silence. Instead, his truth roared through courtrooms, through shelters, through every person we help today. That is what outlives death, truth and love. Lanterns drifted out into the night. I pressed Ernie's ring at my chest and whispered, "We made it, love. You didn't die for nothing." Later, back on the porch, Stephen and I sat in quiet. The night was cool, the stars endless. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" he asked. "The day you got that text?" "All the time," I said softly. "It was the worst moment of my life. And yet, it saved me, because it forced me to see the truth." He nodded, wrapping an arm around me. "And the truth set you free." "Not free," I corrected, "but strong. And strength is enough." I am 76 now. My hair is white, my body slower, but my mind is sharp, my heart steady. I have lost more than most could bear. A husband, 2 sons, friends along the way. But I have also gained resilience, purpose, love that returned in unexpected ways. My story began with betrayal. But it ends, no, it continues, with hope. And when my time comes to join Ernie, I know I will meet him not broken, not silenced, but standing tall, ledger in hand, ready to say, "I kept the truth alive. I carried your name. And together, even in death, we saved lives." That is my ending. That is my legacy. And it is enough.